Susan Hall is the Conservative candidate for London Mayor. She's come under fire for liking a string of racist and Islamophobic tweets, some of which are aimed at current Mayor Sadiq Khan. And this has now all been put to her on LBC, where Nick Ferrari confronted her with those tweets.
Katie Hopkins called the London Mayor, quotes, our nipple height Mayor of Londonistan. And you replied, thank you, Katie. Why?
I can't remember doing that. Probably because I'm so
You can't remember doing that?
No, of course not. Nick, I tweet, or used to.
Do you remember liking a tweet that had the language, it's never too late to get London back, with a picture of Enoch Powell?
Yes, and I've explained that. It's never too late, which is what I'm saying to you. It is not too late to make London better again. We've got traffic jams left, right and centre. We've got the ULEZ expansion.
Are you a fan of Enoch Powell?
No, of course not.
But why? I don't understand. There was a picture of him and you liked that tweet.
I know. If you're a serial tweeter, you tend to go through liking all sorts of things, and you sometimes read things and don't see it. If anybody is offended, then obviously I would apologise. But
you don't think, you can't see why people would be offended with that. You say if anyone is offended.
Well,
I have to explain to you the offence?
No, because it wasn't intended, and this is the thing. If anybody
when you called Gemma Collins a stupid fat blonde woman, was that intended?
I was asking a question to Twitter as to who is this person, and yeah, I mean, I've apologised for that as well. I mean, people will throw these tweets at me, and I accept it. And if I've offended anybody, I apologise.
You keep saying "if" as if you can't realise that there is offence, Susan Hall.
Because
I'm sorry to say it again. Calling someone a stupid fat blonde woman, liking a picture of Enoch Powell, talking about the mayor. I apologise again. A nipple height mayor. You seem surprised people are offended.
Some people are, and some people aren't. Those that are offended, I didn't intend to cause any offence at all. But going back to Lauren,
to the broader question: can you represent Muslims? Can you represent women? Can you represent people? Susan Hall.
Yes, of course I can.
Explain to Lauren how.
And going back to Lauren,
yes,
of course,
please.
We've got an incredible Muslim community. We really do. And if I go back to saying if. To whoever was offended, I most sincerely apologise. I spent a lot of time in mosques, etc., because in London we're very, very lucky. We've got a really good multicultural community out there, and it brings extra depth to London.
Lauren, quick response from you before we move on.
I'm not going to lie, I'm not quite convinced. I think anyone in London from any minority group should be worried.
I'm not quite convinced either. The idea that if someone has shared a tweet that says it's not too late to save London with a picture of Enoch Powell, they're not talking about ULEZ. They're not talking about low traffic zones or traffic jams. Right? They're talking about something else. They're talking about something very, very racist.
Personally, I thought it was hilarious, but I think the FT, it was funny. I was reading an interview with a profile even of Susan Hall in the FT this morning, where she describes herself as like Marmite, which I think is like the exact opposite of what I think most people would describe Susan Hall as, which is, I have no idea who this woman is. Who the fuck is Susan Hall? Like, no one has an opinion on Susan Hall. And I think this is the point, actually. Susan Hall, as we've seen just there, is a fumbling, uncharismatic, gaffe-prone, not media polished. Like, she was just plucked out of obscurity as a conservative, relatively unknown conservative London Assembly member and leader of Harrow Council, I believe. She basically only won this election because her opponent was done for sexual assault or groping someone, I think. And so, she's just been thrust into the spotlight and she has no idea what to do. She's not been media trained. She doesn't realize that people can see when you like their tweets. And so she's sort of just like fumbling into the light. I think what's actually really important about this, though, is that the polling shows that she's only 3 points behind Sadiq Khan, who's actually one of the best known politicians in this country, and is one of the most, popular Labour politicians. So I think what this tells us is something really important, which is that Susan Hall is not a person. No, Susan Hall, I'm not suggesting that Susan Hall is a lizard, but I am suggesting that Susan Hall is not a person. She's an extraordinarily blank canvas on which to paint in primary colours the kind of most extreme version of the Tory right. climate deniers, right-wing kind of racists, Islamophobes, all of this stuff. She's just there to kind of project all of this onto, and it's working quite well. And I think what this shows is it's not necessarily a personality contest. It doesn't need to be, a fumbling Boris Johnson kind of making a sort of semi-celebrity of himself dangling from a zip wire or whatever he did as London mayor. And by the way, not that I would ever say that Boris Johnson is a progressive of any stripe, but Susan Hall does make him look like Mahatma Gandhi. He is the guy who introduced ULEZ, and she is now the most sort of vicious opponent of it. He would go to London Pride. He also said some horrific stuff about gay people, but he went to Pride, whereas she's sort of saying that we need to fight the culture war and stop police officers from going to Pride. I mean, I agree with her, not for the reasons that she's sort of saying, but I think, we need to really take Susan Hall seriously. Not Susan Hall the person, but Susan Hall the idea, because the ideas that she's projecting and giving voice to are gaining a lot of traction. And that's because of something we've talked about previously on this show, which is the growth, the quiet but steady growth of conspiracy theories, including things like 15-minute cities, which is very tied in to the anti-ULEZ protests. And so we need to actually look at the kind of movement that's kind of almost projecting, shooting Susan Hall out of a cannon and into City Hall, and think less about Susan Hall, the individual. I mean, hilarious as that clip was, Michael. Basically what I'm trying to say is this isn't about Susan Hall. This is about the ideas she represents.
Yeah, and you mentioned the polling there. That probably is what's most worrying about this. Let's get up the latest polling for the London mayoral race. It's by JL Partners. Suggests that Hall is on 32%, Sadiq Khan is on 35%. I do think this poll seems to be underestimating the Greens. I can't imagine they're only on 5% in London, but I suppose whatever you make of this, it's going to be fairly close, right? Also, there's a suggestion that third place, Reform UK, they might even drop out. This person is right-wing enough that I'm sure they could ally with her. This shows a number of things, right? I think, one, Sadiq Khan is not extraordinarily popular. Famous, not extraordinarily popular. That looks quite like a Labour core vote. And two, I mean, if Susan Hall ends up winning on sort of 32% or something like this, that is going to be a demonstration of the complete moral bankruptcy, of first past the post. So we talked about this on this show before. This is going to be the first election to the London mayor where there isn't second choice voting. So you only get one vote. And that means that you can win on, say, 32% of the vote if the alternative is massively split. So if the left-wing vote is split between Labour and the Greens, for example, then you could get the Tories coming through. Now, the reason I like second preference voting and hate sort of first past the post is because it means that you get this sort of moral blackmail of all the Green voters saying you have to vote Labour, otherwise you're going to let the Tories in. But I mean, it's blackmail in some sense. It's also somewhat true, right? So it's really undemocratic to do things like this. I suppose the only silver lining, if Susan Hall were to win on 32% of the vote, Labour would likely have just entered Westminster, and potentially that would be sort of a good reason for them to say, well, we're going to bring back second preference voting. I suppose the argument against that is second preference voting actually does allow for rivals to the Labour Party to rise up, so they might not have that much interest in bringing it back. I think Labour find it quite handy that they get to morally blackmail Green voters to say vote for us or let the Tories in, because it means they don't have to be particularly ambitious when it comes to what they're pledging to do.